How's it going, guys? Thanks so much for clicking on this video. This is a CDL Talent Roundtable discussion where all of us as talent got together, put our heads together, and basically talked on each and every single CDL roster heading into MW2. We chat on what was their journey last season, what they've currently constructed, and the way that this roster could look or this team could look moving into the MW2 year. So major thank you to all of the talent for joining in on this, for having these conversations, as well as to Bryce, who actually orchestrated all of this stuff to come together. Now the full-on VODs will have a full part 1 and a full part 2. Those links rather will be in the description of this video that you can feel free to check out to watch it more in long form. If you want to check out certain teams, certain snippets, I will have that here located on the channel. If you haven't seen your favorite teams upload yet, I promise it's coming. We talked about all 12 of them. So make sure to let us know, whether through different content pieces, if you want to tweet, comment, like, subscribe, any way that you guys can show us some support to let us know that you guys like content like this. We would love to hear it. We'd love to hear your guys' feedback, output on ways that we could even make it better. So without further ado, I'll leave you to it. Enjoy the video, and I'll see you back here on the channel really soon.
Next up, Minnesota ROKKR, a team you can't really talk about unless you mention Ultra in the same breath. CAMMY and Bance have switched over here, as well as AFRO'S come over. But let's talk about ROKKR last year. Go on, Chance. I can hear you. You want to kick off with the team?
We're talking about ROKKR now. I wanted to compare the Toronto and like Minnesota. If you want to do old stuff first,
yeah. We'll get to that first because we need to give some context for Minnesota ROKKR. Last year, I don't even know how I felt about this team last year, other than I think a lot of the times I was like, what is going on? Like, what is happening with Minnesota ROKKR? I don't know what to expect from them. I don't know if they're going to be good or bad. I felt like a good part of the year, I just felt very negatively about this team.
And they won an event.
Won an event? That's the kind of crazy thing.
I don't know.
It was an event last year?
Wait a minute. Are you talking about the right
Yeah, they did it. What you talking about?
I'm tripping.
I was like, what the hell are you saying? I know the boys ain't win.
Stop it out.
About the prior year, I was like, oh, okay.
I was thinking,
Minnesota.
I'm like,
yeah, that's Cold War.
Yeah, when they were down 4-0 and made a comeback. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that put out.
No, but in all seriousness, I think that this Minnesota ROKKR team, well, obviously, let's talk about the past real quick. Last year, Minnesota ROKKR, they were kind of all over the place, man. Like, I remember in the beginning, Attach was running an SMG, then they switched his role to become the main AR, and then they started to get a lot more success. Minnesota ROKKR, at least with players like Attach on their team, they're always going to find themselves decent at search and destroy. But when you're not winning your respawns, that's usually what makes the game difficult. So when you looked at their roster last year, they had Major Maniac come in. They dropped that guy. And then eventually, they work down, they make a couple changes. They add Havoc to the roster, put him in the SMG role. Now you got Attach running the main AR. I feel like this team was just all over the place all year last year. Like, Standy seemed unhappy. Priesta, he was very inconsistent. Attach, he was their most consistent player, but nothing was showing in the results. Obviously, him as an individual, he was putting up the numbers, but the results for Minnesota ROKKR weren't the best. They had multiple events where they started in lose bracket because they simply couldn't win their online matches. So, like, Minnesota ROKKR all over the place last year. I feel like going into this year with this team, it's sort of going to be the same thing. I don't really see a big change for this team where they can turn it around and be like, all right, I'm looking at this roster, they can win events. It's not like they made any crazy roster moves. I feel like this team is basically the same exact team that they had last year, just different names.
Okay, I like that way. By the way, I'm fairly certain this ROKKR team last year, one of the worst performing teams on LAN.
Without question.
I mean,
period.
Yeah, I'm reminding myself of the events.
You need to.
I need to, yeah.
Let's keep in mind, by the way,
they won $20,000 last year.
Balling.
Oh, wow.
I mean, they did terribly.
And be really
imagine if they don't add Havoc.
Yeah, they're screwed.
Like, imagine if that doesn't work out.
Yeah, nah.
Chance, what was wrong? Chance, what was wrong with Minnesota last year?
They weren't good. I mean, that was the thing that cracked me up with Jay. Was like they had like mixed result, dude. They were at the bottom the entire time. Their tournaments, they were placing top 8.
Hey, they had a good qualifier.
It's because like you could see like during the qualifiers, they would show up one day and randomly beat like Atlanta FaZe or something like that. And you'd be like, wow, this team is on point. I remember one stage they deadass were like 4-0 in the stage. They started in winners bracket and then they get to the event and double lose both of their first matches to get eliminated. Like, team was just all over the place, bro.
Yeah, and I mean they had a couple like bad, like just like unlucky placements in like some of the tournaments that they had where they had to deal with like 2 top teams, both in winners and in losers for like the quick 2-0s and whatnot. But that's just, I mean, them's the breaks. Like that's how it's going to be in a league this competitive. So it just wasn't a good year for him. I mean, anytime you have, you know, one of the more legendary players in COD that's making a role switch in the middle of the year, like that's like something's just going wrong. And
100%.
that was their shining light. Like Attach was looking like their best player. I think maybe both on a sub, and especially so when he switched to main AR.
Yeah, he was their best player.
When both
I
roles.
will say though,
both roles.
just so we don't rag on him too much for last year, I like for the split that Toronto Ultra had, where 2 players go to Minnesota, they keep like 2 of their own players. I think the Minnesota ROKKR got the better end of the deal over Toronto Ultra going into this year. Maybe that's a hot take. I'm getting vibes like that's a hot take, but to me, it sort of
Toronto
makes sense.
didn't get double. They only just got Standy.
Well, no, I'm saying Toronto kept CleanX and Insight, though. I'm saying each of those teams has 2 players from the old roster.
Gotcha.
And so, look, like, in my mind, it is a foot race between these 2 organizations this year of, like, who got the better end of that deal. And I think by the end of it, Minnesota ROKKR is going to be the answer for the team. And for ability to replicate this success in the style of play that, like, the old Toronto Ultra team had, Bance and CAMMY are obviously 2 of the same players. I think Attach is somewhat of a parallel to Insight as like a main AR, except Attach like honestly has more slang and respawn. It's not like Attach doesn't have the clutch ability that Insight has in S&D. Attach is the most clutch player of all time and was doing it in Vanguard. So I think in a sense, you can make the argument that that's an upgrade. It's just that Attach's teams haven't been getting the same kind of results, but I think there is like the potential for Attach to be an upgrade from Insight. And then, I mean, what's the other one? Like Afro versus, I mean, if it's Afro versus Sandy, honestly, I'm taking Afro with the core that's around him. And if you want to do Afro versus CleanX, like it hasn't been proven. CleanX is certainly more proven that he's been a better player than Afro, but Afro hasn't had a roster like this. And I think this could be like his true year to break out and be the superstar that we've been like toying with the idea for a few years. So I'm kind of high on this Minnesota ROKKR team.
I think what we saw last year from Toronto Ultra with CleanX, you saw he struggled. It's because he was playing with Bance. I feel like the same thing is going to happen to Afro this year. I feel like Afro is now going to take a decline because he's now playing with Bance, who's always going to go on a flank.
Why do you?
I don't know.
No, I don't. I love Benjamin. I love Bance. It's just like when you're making those plays, you're either the playmaker, you're either making the plays to win the game or making the plays to lose your team the game.
Is there?
If you're hitting that round, all your teammates down on that one side, you're basically chalked.
Is there a case that could be made really quick, just so you guys can be united in this way? Is there a case that also does say though that like Afro and CleanX are clearly not the same player? So
they are
that's
not.
By playing with Bance, it does change up because it feels like, at least from my opinion, it did feel like CleanX fastest player in the league. We're always talking about how Bance is at the back, like you have CleanX in the front, Bance is at the back. I don't know if like Afro is the same player as CleanX. Thus, it feels like there was a chance that changing up the strategy, a different formula of these 2 being together, I don't know. I feel like it's worth the experiment.
I mean, I don't know. I think I'm just stuck on, I think Bance I'm not looking at. Like, I think Jay is looking this as like a pace thing in game. I'm looking at Bance of being like, he's a playmaker. His comms are going to be good. He's orchestrating things on the map. And like, yeah, that is like a specific sort of style you have to work around. But I think there is a ton of value to that. I think Bance, maybe unquestionably, but at the very least has an argument for being one of the like top 3 smartest players in the league. Like, I'll tip the cap in that direction. So I think the potential is there. I think the Toronto Ultra last year, if I remember right, the biggest dropout they had was just CAMMY. He went from being like MVP caliber in Cold War to just sort of like average in the slang department. And I think it was him that once he started to get it together, like in Hardpoint specifically, is when they went from being like 0-13 in the game mode to like 50-50. And I think CAMMY's now going back to like this engine for like MW that we saw what he was doing in MW 2019. That's when we were like, oh, holy shit, this guy can play. Like, what is going on right now? Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I think it might be a bit of a foot race, like a neck and neck head to head between Minnesota ROKKR and Toronto Ultra. I think most people, if they were betting of who could potentially shit the bed harder, it would be the Minnesota that would take the hit and end up falling towards the bottom. Yeah, I just think personally, I see the potential. I see the orchestration of the team. Like, I
was not as positive about this roster, which is a shame. I really like all the players.
That's not very biased of you.
And I was like,
Yeah, it's
I'm
basically a
not-
European team, Bryce. Like,
Bryce,
I know,
come on,
and that's
go
the
forward.
weird thing. That's the weird thing. Like, I love these players, but I looked at this roster and I was like, there's a long way to fall here, brothers. Like, there is a long way down in this league. And that's what I'm kind of reflecting off Chance's point, though. Like, I feel like you were talking about this team has potential, but like, I think Bance is a known quantity. I think Attach is a known quantity. I think the question marks for me are going to be about CAMMY. Is he going to be a god or not? And Afro in this system, I think it's probably going to be good for him coming out of the London roster. I don't think it was stable enough over there for him. I think he needs the fresh start. I think this would be I think it was a great pickup from Minnesota to say, hey, come on over. Attach knows what he's doing. We'll make sure you're doing well, right? But my worry is around those two players, not because I think they're bad players, but because I haven't seen the consistency I would like to see last year, right? I think Afro was good when he was great, and I think CAMMY had flashes of his old self, but it's well known CAMMY hated Vanguard.
yeah, he was getting cooked.
Hated it. Every time I spoke to him, hated that game. And if I go to the event and he loves this game, I'm like, all right, yeah, cool. I'm all on board with the ROKKR this year.
I'm all in.
Yeah. But yeah, I didn't want to come across like negative about this team. I just look at them as middle of the pack because I think there's too many variables for me to figure out what I'm seeing this year. Like a lot of teams, I know roughly what I expect from the players. Two of the players on this roster could be great or could not be great. And I don't think it'll be their fault. I think it just depends on how this team works. But
Yeah.
I guarantee you the Battle of the North is Game 5. That's for sure.
Yeah.
It's one of the first
I
matches we
don't know.
have, by the way. I think of Major One.
Yeah.
I think they play
It is.
like their second match against each other.
Yep.
Nice.
For me, I think it's difficult to say where they are going to be. I think they're absolutely going to be towards the top, but I think it maybe leads to a conversation we'll maybe have another day of how stacked the top teams are. I think, we'll get to our phase conversation, but there's no detective needed to maybe think that everybody thinks they are going to be the best team this year, because I mean, it would be insane to not think that. But outside of that, I think there's another 5 teams there who have potential to win the event. And I think Minnesota are a team who are in this mix. Maybe I said divulge down my personal list of the other 5 teams another time, but I think they are within that mix of teams who very much could be there towards the top at every single event.
Okay. All right. So it's kind of basically we are pitching Ultra and ROKKR against each other from the off for good reason, and I think that may be a year-long battle to see how it goes down. So we've had kind of a mixed bag here from this one. Does anybody kind of want to say what we think is going to happen with this team as the year progresses? Like the
Middle of the
future
pack,
of this
bro.
team? Middle of the
I'm
pack?
telling you, middle of the pack. I just don't see a level where this team can reach new levels when they're going up against better teams. Like if they go up against a team like Atlanta FaZe, we're asking Bance and Afro to just sit side by side or slay side by side with Sip and Abizi. I just simply don't see that being the case. And then with CAMMY, he's the hit or miss guy. Bryce, you're saying that he has to be a god this game for this team to be good. Why can't he just be
I think he has to be a
decent for
god this
team to be
game for
solid?
this team to be great. I think this team will be okay to good anyway. I think the difference is if we see CAMMY be everything we know he can be. He set a standard for himself.
Okay.
I don't think I saw it on Vanguard. I want to see that standard again.
I've had the opportunity to actually watch them scrim a lot in this game, and unfortunately, they weren't looking too good. And the reason why, at least in my opinion, is just simply because of a pacing issue. Like the team is kind of slow in certain situations, they're fast in kind of situation, and they're just simply just flipping spawns. A lot of teams just running through them when it comes to these respawn game modes. So unless their S&D is tippity top, like in the beginning of the game, I feel like this team is going to start off slow at the beginning of the year and then slowly work their way to potentially a top 6 to be their best.
It's really funny because I feel like if we could see one official hard point, whatever hard point you want, versus any team in the league, if we got to see CAMMY play and just see like what a stat line would be, I wonder what our opinions would be. Like I guarantee that we would all have like a totally different temperature to the way that we talk about Minnesota. If he plays well, oh my gosh, well look at the potential that ROKKR has. If he plays horribly or if he doesn't play well, then it's like imagine what our opinions would be. Oh well, see Minnesota, there are some issues. CAMMY's there. Like I feel like if we had one series just to go off of, we would actually be able to determine what will be Minnesota, and I'll hand it off to you, TUNN. The last thing I will say is that about ROKKR, I do feel like we're not going to have a situation with them throughout this season to where it's going to be these highs and lows. It's not going to be like, hey, Major 1 didn't play well. Major 2 really elevated themselves. I feel like we're going to know what ROKKR we have within the very first few matches. It's just a matter of seeing that first one.
I seen a CAMMY 1v4 on the first day. They're winning it all.
Hell yeah, let's get it. Hell yeah.